Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robertson here, bringing you all a very special video to let you know that I've released a couple of new spacecraft for space engineers on the Steam Workshop tonight, including the one you can see before you here, sitting on the landing pad. These are two Starcruiser class vessels, which essentially means they're cruiser or heavy cruiser sized ships, namely the Asterion and Theseus class. And it's the Asterion Starcruiser that I'll be taking a look at with you all today. Well, mainly because it's the only one of the two ships that can land on an Earth-like planet, as the other, the Theseus, can only really fly around in space or moons that have less than 0.3 Earth Gs. Originally, I was only going to release these two spacecraft during the next Space Engineer series I had planned, but considering that they only feature briefly in future videos, and due to the unique COVID-19 situation that we're facing, with many of my current viewers and subscribers being forced to stay at home and endure long hours watching Netflix videos and dodgy Twitch streamers, I thought I'd release them early to help everyone with their lockdown blues. Lockdown. That's the sort of worrying terminology you use when referring to prisoners. Anyway, these are two of the new generation of combat spacecraft that are being constructed in orbit around Hades and Terra Nova, and are going to be in extensive use by the Terran Space Force. But hey, I don't want to go too much into detail there, as it would spoil the story a little for you folks who haven't seen it yet. As you've just seen, there is a boarding ladder, but I'm just going to use the cargo and crew elevator instead, as it's much more fun. Going up. Now, just to give you folks a heads up, this vessel is a tail-sitter, which means that all of the decks, with the exception of the CIC and hangar bay, are perpendicular to the axis of thrust. In other words, it has a layout that's similar to that of a skyscraper or office tower, which may take a little getting used to for all you Star Trek and Star Wars sci-fantasy fans out there, but those of you who follow the Expanse series will know exactly what I mean. In fact, the unique layout is what enables a vessel of the size to be able to land and take off from an Earth-like planet. Indeed, this is the largest Terran warship that is capable of it. All the other larger vessels like the Chogan Maxwell or Montero are all tugs or cargo freighters, and as such they don't have to worry about the extra mass required for heavy armour and weaponry. But saying that, there are a couple more Starcruisers I've been working on in the meantime. The Dunsworth Civilian Starcruiser, which I released for you guys earlier, and the Atalanta class, which is similar to the Theseus, but sacrifices some of its firepower to be able to land on the surface of a moon. Again, it's just too heavy to land on an Earth-like planet, but that's quite often the case for vessels that use a lot of heavy armour blocks. Anyway, enough about the other cruisers, I'm supposed to be focusing on this one. As you can see, I'm currently in the engineering section, or the reactor room to be more specific. The two large reactors and the jump drives are behind another, albeit smaller layer of heavy armour, to help protect against player-made missiles and railgun rounds from one of the more popular mods, which I also happen to use. Yeah, there's nothing particularly fancy in there, it's essentially the same as the Alysius, except slightly better protected. What I have done is left plenty of space, so if players want to use mods and install a shield generator or something, well, they can. Now this next section houses the propellant tanks, the hydrogen fuel to be precise, and the cargo containers. As you can see, they stretch quite far up, and I've added stairs on both sides, but for those of you looking to head on up to the upper decks faster, I've added a maintenance access passageway and ladder. In this version, which I use personally, I've added that VCZ elevator mod, but I'll probably get rid of it as it tends to glitch out and the elevator cabin rotates at weird angles and bangs around during flight, which can be quite unnerving. Now, the version of these vessels I'll be releasing on the workshop will be vanilla, or mod-free anyway, so there will be no elevator or railguns, but the option is there to add them for yourselves. Anyway, as you can see, the elevator does get us up here pretty quickly, but we do miss out on the other decks, so I'll just bring us back down again using the magic of video editing. There we go, that's us ready to take the long way up, as we move away from those nuclear reactors in engineering and towards the living quarters. Even though they have built-in shielding, I still like to use hydrogen tanks as a buffer between the reactors and the living quarters in my designs, as, in real life, it does provide a good amount of protection against radiation, or so I've read. At the very least, all these stairs are some good exercise for you, for during those long trips in deep space. Or you could just cheat and use your jetpack. As you can see, there are 2 large cargo containers stored in here, along with some smaller ones to access them, and some LCD readouts, but we're just going to ignore those for now and proceed up to the next deck. Like with all my other creations, I use Whip's auto door and airlock script. It does mean it'll take slightly longer to get around, but you're a lot less likely to lose oxygen if one of the adjoining sections is ever compromised. Now this deck contains the holding cells, cryopods and computer core. I won't bother going into any of the holding cells as they're just a couple of beds and a toilet. Nothing particularly exciting, to be honest. Next up we have the cryogenics room, which contains all the cryopods needed if the crew are ever required to go into hibernation. And there's even a survival kit, just in case there's any complications upon revival. The reason for that is because the medical bay is located on a different deck, and as you can see there's also a ladder added for aesthetic purposes. Next we have the computer core, or server room, which houses a lot of the scripts that this vessel uses, such as the auto LCDs and auto door scripts. The really important ones can be found upstairs in the CIC, where they are better protected against any kind of damage. This deck contains the briefing room and the officers' quarters. I'll visit the officers' quarters first as they're the closest. Yeah, they're not the most spacious of rooms, but compared to the shared quarters that the rest of the crew have, these are the height of luxury, complete with all your mod cons. The captain's and executive officers' quarters are more or less a mirror of each other, so there's not really much more to see here. Unless, of course, you want to spend some quality time watching vids on that LCD screen, and catch up with the latest adventures of that Captain Hutt. Cabin, or whatever his name is. And here we have the all-important briefing room, or ready room if you want to use wet navy terminology, complete with a large LCD screen and a holographic table. And what's more, you can even dim the lights using this control panel, making it easier to see what's being displayed on screen. Just remember not to leave it dark for too long, otherwise some of your crew at the back might end up falling asleep. Next up we have the crew quarters, mess hall and airlocks. Now, by this point we should all be familiar with how airlocks work. However, in this instance, because we're still planetside, it wouldn't be advisable for me to actually go out at this time, so I'll just admire the view instead and promptly come back in. As with the Odysseus class, there's airlocks on both sides, with the connector on the port, for use when docking at a space station. The crew quarters are as Spartan as you would expect, with the beds in a bunk arrangement to save space. There's also a sitting area, desk, and lockers for each of the crew. As you would expect, there's also showers for hygiene purposes, though those are considered a luxury in a ship like this. The beds have shutters in them for privacy, they also have air conditioning and safety restraints. The toilets, or latrines, are your standard affair with lockable doors and hand wash basins, so all in all, despite their small size, these quarters are actually pretty comfortable. And for added security, there's an interior turret that covers both airlocks. And here we have the mess hall, where the crew can eat, relax and socialise. As you would expect with any mess hall, it's clean, spacious and has adequate seating for all the crew. More than enough in fact, given that they work in shifts. It also comes with a jukebox, a small kitchen area, and, as an added luxury, there is a viewing port, so whenever the ship has landed or docked somewhere safe, the crew can choose to look outside, which I'd imagine would help with their mental well-being to some extent. Normally you don't see windows or viewing ports on military vessels as they're considered a structural weakness, but it's good to see they've included some anyway, and added some blast doors in front of them too. And if memory serves me right, the only other Starcruiser that has windows or viewing ports is the civilian variant, the Dunsworth. And on this next deck we have the medical bay and the armory. There's also access to the command deck from here, and there's also some guest quarters, which are really just a slight improvement from the crew quarters below. Actually, when you think about it, these are just less flashy versions of the officers' quarters. Up ahead is the medical bay, which, as we would expect, has everything you would need in order to patch up anyone that's been injured, or to treat anyone that's fallen ill, including full body scanners and 2 recovery beds. There's even an emergency cryopod, so if someone is too badly hurt, they can be put into hibernation until you reach the nearest spaceport. And, if you remember from earlier, this is where the elevator or maintenance access brought us, skipping all the other decks below. And here we have the armory, where the crew can arm and equip themselves as the mission requires, be that performing maintenance outside, going on away missions, or simply arming themselves in preparation to repel potential boarders. Or dare I say it, preparing to board and capture an enemy vessel themselves. As you'll have no doubt noticed, there was another interior turret in there too. Indeed, you'll find many of them placed at strategic locations around this vessel. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is where things are about to get interesting, and possibly even slightly confusing for many of you, as the next 2 sections are laid out at a 90-degree angle to the rest of the decks below us, but there are ladders and doorways that allow us to access the CIC, so that way we can enter and leave that section even when the ship has landed on its tail, which you are about to see. Yeah, I know it looks a little like that artwork by MC Escher right now, but bear with me. Alternatively, you could use your jetpack to get around in this place, but that would waste hydrogen. And who knows, there might be situations where you don't have the luxury of being able to use a jetpack. In which case you'll actually be glad for all these ladders and stairs. And there we go, that's us finally inside the Combat Information Centre, or CIC. All I need to do now is get into the captain's chair. The other stations can be accessed from here as well, but the one that we want is in the middle. There we go. As you can see, this console lets you see the various LCD screens with important information regarding the status of your vessel, including an artificial horizon inside the CIC that can be used if the forward cameras get destroyed during combat. In fact, one of these cameras should be the virtual cockpit. There it is, and it has its own HUD. The other camera views are really just to enhance your situational awareness, but they also help when it comes to lining up with other vessels or when you're trying to dock with a connector. In fact, you'll notice I've added a message on this one to let you know that the connector is offset by 2 blocks above the camera's viewpoint, as I've landed in the wrong place a few times myself in this thing. But I think one of the reasons for that is because it's the other way around in both the Atalanta and Dunsworth class. Anyway, it's time to commence the liftoff procedure and get this beast into orbit. And providing I don't mess anything up, we should only burn around 25 to 30% of our fuel in doing so, but bearing in mind I am using a speed mod and DraygoKorvan's atmospheric resistance and reentry mod, so this will vary dramatically from vanilla, as there will be less resistance but a lower top speed. Okay, everything looks good. Let's do this. What you will need to remember is that while this thing can take off and land from Earth-like planets, it should only be done so sparingly, as it does burn a lot of your fuel. I'd say around half of it if you need to do a lot of manoeuvring to land correctly. Plus, this thing is quite tall, which means that it doesn't like to land on a slope, not more than 5 to 10 degrees to be on the safe side. So you'll need to scout out a good landing site beforehand, or make sure you only land on a purpose-built landing pad, like the one at Avalon Colony. You can save fuel by making sure you've got a GPS coordinate marked out in orbit pretty much straight up from your landing zone, as it'll save on having to make any unnecessary adjustments on the way down. But with all that being said, the fact that it can land on planets like Eden or Terra Nova makes this Starcruiser particularly versatile, and I can see it being used to transport strike teams, or more likely, visiting VIPs and dignitaries, to the surface. More so as the Asterion has a lot more firepower and armour protection than any of the smaller VTOLs and shuttlecraft. Regarding firepower, as you would expect with any contemporary combat vessel, the Asterion comes with an impressive range of weaponry, including no less than 12 25mm Gatling turrets and 8 200mm dumbfire missile turrets, which essentially makes them rocket turrets to be honest. But it also comes with 8 Fury Mark II point defence turrets that are linked to the powerful Diamond Dome defence system, as well as 2 large turrets, each with twin rocket launchers, and 2 pylons each with 6 Starlance guided missiles, for 12 in total. I did toy with the idea of making the missile launchers built into the vessel and have new ones being welded up after each shot, but there's still that annoying bug with space engineers where every so often the missiles don't weld correctly, especially their merge blocks, and as a result they would bang around inside during manoeuvres and cause damage to everything around them. Plus, having the missile launchers on forward-facing pylons that use merge blocks means they can be swapped around for modded missiles more easily. And they're less likely to miss anything at close range, which is what tended to happen with some modded and player-made missiles that have a wide turning circle when fired out of a side or top-facing launcher. Another advantage that you have over the weld-as-you-go system is that you can fire off each missile pretty much one after the other, spamming your unfortunate target with up to 12 missiles at once to overwhelm their point defences. Yes, I know, I'm a monster. But when the majority of your opponents tend to be low-life pirates and marauders that like to prey on innocent civilians, then, well, let's just say that being nice to them isn't something I'm overly concerned about. Another feature that I've added, and one that will certainly appeal to all you hard sci-fi fans out there, is that even though Space Engineers doesn't really have proper heat management, it's still something that I like to RP into the Let's Play series that I do, and as such, this vessel even comes with fake radiators that can be deployed and retracted by switching some projectors on and off again. The reason I've done them this way is so that anyone that doesn't like the look of them in-game can just leave them turned off. And because they're not permanent features of the vessel, they don't really add anything to the weight, nor do they get in the way of the turrets, but I thought it would be cool to add them nonetheless. It is a shame that the projectors can't make them look completely solid, but hey, I guess we can't have everything. What I will also mention is that even though this Starcruiser has impressive acceleration, all that mass and heavy armour means that it's very sluggish when it comes to manoeuvring. Not as bad as many of the heavy cruisers out there, but it doesn't exactly turn on a dime either, so you'll need to bear that in mind before going into combat. In most cases, anything fast or manoeuvrable enough to be able to get and stay in the Asterion's 6 o'clock position will still be exposed to fire from several Gatling turrets, even at close range. And, as many smaller craft or espatiers using jetpacks will find out, at point blank range, these Starcruisers still have a nasty sting in their tail, so be warned. Well, we're almost in orbit now, and also near the end of the tour, so I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. Before we conclude though, I'll show you how the gravity has changed on this deck, and as a result, why the stairwell was laid out in the way it was. And for those of you who were worried and were asking where Benson was, oh, don't worry guys, Benson's still here. In fact, I'm still using the same spacesuit, so he's always bloody here. Aren't you, Ben?
Affirmative, Captain.
You see? Well, you didn't think I was going to get rid of him that easily, did you? And what's worse is that shortly before I started recording, I asked him if you had any questions, thinking he'd raise any concerns about the blasted ship before we got on board. And do you know what he asked me instead? Go on, Ben, tell the viewers what you asked me shortly before I started bloody recording.
Yes, Captain. The question that I asked you was, when are you planning on starting your next Space Engineers series?
Yeah, you see what I've got to put up with? I mean, give me strength. He's starting to sound like you guys now. Anyway, as I told him earlier, that and many other questions will be answered in due course. As right now, however, I have this showcase video to wrap up, and as you can see, things have turned around on us, quite literally. That's right, now that we're in orbit, the gravity generator has kicked in and we're standing on what is now correctly supposed to be the floor, and the stairwell, as you can see, is now facing the correct way. But here's the thing, as we get to the bottom of this corridor, we're affected by the other gravity generator. How cool is that? By doing it this way, it means that all the lower decks are still laid out correctly for us. Well, the last place for us to visit now is the hangar bay. And as you'll see soon enough, it's just a smaller version of the one used by the Odysseus, as obviously it's not meant to carry ground vehicles, but it's still large enough to carry a medium-sized aerospace VTOL such as the Olympus 207 or the MS-10 Griffin, as well as those two small mining and construction vessels that were made by Keen and appear in that tutorial mission of theirs. Alternatively, if you're feeling adventurous or wanted to try and save even more space, you could just use drones instead, like that Janus utility drone made by Malmarid. The entrance itself is 3 large blocks high, which should be more than enough for the aforementioned craft to get through, and like all the other hangar bays I've created in the past, it uses a couple of timer blocks to create a rudimentary airlock and warning light system, just enough to give people a warning as to when the doors are opening and closing, and to save as much oxygen as possible. I'll just activate it again so you guys can see the warning lights from the outside. They're for aesthetic purposes more than anything, but they could still be useful for someone who's having trouble seeing the entrance to the hangar bay. Well folks, I guess that pretty much wraps up tonight's showcase. If all goes well, these Starcruisers should be available on the Steam Workshop shortly after this video has uploaded, and I hope you all enjoy using them in-game. So, in closing, Ben and I would like to wish everyone all the very best during these difficult times, and we hope to see you all again in the next video. Be nice to the viewers and say goodbye, Benson.
As you wish, Captain. Goodbye, Benson.
Oh, good grief. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robertson, signing off. I swear you did that on purpose, you bastard.